All right, so let's talk about water today. I love water. Water's good. It's a wonderful molecule. So much I could say about water. I teach an entire course on water, in fact, but we're just going to kind of touch on it a little bit, mostly around health and consumption, but I want to talk about hard water and things like that too. And then we'll get to the minerals. I might finish today. I'm not sure. The minerals section is kind of short, but we'll see where we get. Sometimes I talk too much, and that's okay. If it goes on until next day, that's all right. So in terms of your body, you probably know most of your body's water. Well, or most, at least the majority. Kind of depends on the person. Little people, like children, tend to have a higher body percentage of water than older people, and I guess all of us are somewhere in the middle. Women a little bit more than men. Again, it kind of just depends on your body composition and whatnot. But about 60%, that number floats around. And we, of course, talked about protein and carbohydrates and fat. Those are parts of our body. And you can see that minerals are around 5 to 6%, kind of somewhere in there, of which the biggest one is, of course, calcium, because our bones are made a lot out of calcium. You can see they're mentioning a few others there. We'll get to the minerals there eventually. But let's talk about water. So water is, oops, what's going on there? There we go. Oh, more about water and minerals. Water is very abundant on the planet. It's essential for life. We'll talk about that in a minute. I was going to say with the minerals, often they're kind of grouped into two categories. Major minerals, so the ones over maybe 100 grams, versus the trace minerals. Some of them are very, very tiny amounts. And actually with the trace minerals, there's even a few that kind of scientifically, they debate whether they're essential or not. Now they're kind of in that list of you might need it. We're not sure because the amounts are so tiny. All right, so much more about water. Water, of course, is H2O. I'm hoping everybody knows that. I will not ask you that on a test. I will just assume that you know it. This is what the water molecule looks like, and it's very fascinating, like I said, from a chemistry standpoint, in terms of what water can do. So many amazing things it can do, which is part of the reason why it's essential for life. And also because it's a solvent, and this is what our cells are bathed in. I think I have some of the roles of water. There's probably at least thousands of reactions that involve water as either a reactant or a product. Cells, of course, are made of mostly water. You have all sorts of solutes and foods that are dissolved in the water. A big part of water on a macro level is thermoregulation. So you probably know if you get too hot, you might sweat. And that's actually very important for large animals such as ourselves. So we don't want to overheat and those kind of things. You can see there's a few other things on there, things I always forget, lubrication around joints, shock absorber, those kind of things. And of course, another big part of water is, or big role of water is that our circulatory system, our blood, is mostly water with cells and a few other things in there, but it needs that medium in order to flow around, right? If it was a solid medium, that probably would not work out so well. Water allows our blood to move around quite easily and be pumped by our heart. Just a little breakdown. You can see I've got, looks like a man and a woman there. I'm sorry, just realizing that it's kind of not quite, a little bit trimmed off at the top and the bottom. But you can see the female is on the left and the male is on the right. So you can see a slightly different proportion kind of on average in terms of water. And then they're showing the breakdown of the fluids. And you have intracellular fluid. So there's a term for you. Intracellular fluid means inside the cell, right? So that's where 2/3 of our water is, inside cells. There's another 1/3 that is extracellular, and that includes just liquid that bathes the cells. It includes blood, those kind of things. You can see they're showing here that you can break that down into other components. Interstitial fluid as well, which is just the fluid that's around cells. And that kind of fluid can get regulated with electrolytes. We'll talk about those in a bit, but electrolytes kind of fine-tune that balance. And if you don't have enough electrolytes, sometimes that's a problem. And children tend to have a little bit more fluid in that area as well, which adds to their excess fluid in their body. But you can see, bottom line is most of your fluid is in your cells, and the last third is kind of bathing your cells and in your blood. So something that people talk about a little bit when they're looking at water requirements and things like that is something called water balance. And so water balance really just means how much water you're taking in and how much water you are getting rid of. And so if you look at water balance in terms of water that we bring in, there's just 3 categories, or 2, depending on how you want to look at it. One category is your food and drink. The other category is some water is actually created by your metabolic reactions in your cells. And it's actually a significant amount. You can see in terms of the number of liters, it's showing, so this guy here, you can see that it says, 1,400 to about 2,800 milliliters. Okay, so that's 1.4 to almost 3 liters. And if you look at the water created by your metabolism, it's 200 to 300 milliliters. So that's not quite as much as you'd have in a can of soda, right? A can of soda, I think, is 355. So a little bit less than that, but about a cup of water made by your metabolism. In terms of excretion, you're looking at water that you urinate, so that's where the kidneys come in. There's a little bit of water in your feces. We lose water through our respiration, just breathing out. Moisture comes out of our lungs, and a little bit of water from sweating. And obviously, all of these things can vary depending on what you're doing, right? If you're doing, if you're working out, and you're doing it this time of year, you're going to sweat a little bit. If you're working out in the summer, let's say you're playing a soccer game and it's 32 degrees Celsius, you're going to lose a lot more water. In fact, you can lose in extreme heat and vigorous exercise, you can lose up to 2 liters of water per hour, right? And that's actually really hard to replenish that just from drinking fluids. And so that's why, anytime there's sports going on at these hot temperatures, often a lot of our regulatory bodies have special rules for hydration and whatnot to make sure that happens. Remember when that happened with, where was it? When the World Cup was in Brazil. So soccer games are 45-minute halves. And they actually put it in because the temperature was so high, these new FIFA rules that they can have the refs can call water breaks. And that was kind of a big deal. And it was one of those things that everyone else kind of said, well, no kidding, people need water when it's that warm. So it's important to keep that in mind, right? We'll talk about electrolytes in a bit here. I don't want to talk a little bit about water needs. You can get too much water. There's always stories every once in a while about these people that have, it's called hypotremia. This is where someone is drinking too much water and they're literally diluting their blood and they don't have enough electrolytes in there because they're just drinking pure water. I was listening to a podcast about this guy in the States, and he's one of these people who does these epic hikes all across the country and all across the world. I mean, epic meaning it'll take him weeks to get from point A to point B. And he was talking about when he started out doing this kind of thing, how he just decided he was going to do it and knew nothing about it in terms of, all sorts of little basic things like proper footwear, how much food to bring. And he said the very first trip, he was just thinking about how much water he had to carry and drank something like 3 liters in one sitting. And then, was feeling dizzy and lightheaded and had to go to emergency. And it turns out this is what he had, this hyponatremia. In worst case scenarios, this actually can lead to death. You can see a bunch of the symptoms on here: fatigue, seizures, confusion, all of those kind of things. And like I said, you're just diluting your blood too much, not enough electrolytes. And so all of that balance is kind of messed up. So that does happen once in a while. And like I said, I'll get to electrolytes in a few minutes. We're very good as humans at regulating our water, something called thirst. And it turns out that most of us are actually very good at regulating our water. I know there's tons of marketing telling you to look at the color of your urine and to, make sure you're getting, 8 to 12 cups of water a day and all those kind of things. And what happens when you drink 8 to 12 cups in a day? You're running to the washroom 1,000 times. And it's no fun. I can tell you, I remember, so I coach soccer, by the way. And I remember my son's group, one of the coaches was was one of the other coaches was telling the kids, you know, it's hot, make sure you guys hydrate. You know, you should be drinking this much water before the game and this much, you know, and all that. And so what happens, we're like 2 minutes to kickoff and the boys are like this, right? And I'm just like, okay, run, you know, go to the washroom and get it out of your system, right? They hydrate it too much, right? It's kind of a bit of a myth, this whole thing about looking at trying to get so much water in your system, because our bodies are very good at regulating our thirst. Not everybody. Some people do have disorders where there's messages are a little mixed up, or sometimes, you know, as humans, we don't listen to those messages, right? Because maybe we don't have drink handy or something like that. But you can see what this is trying to show you what is going on is it's the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is in your brain. It's responsible for a whole bunch of things, kind of appetite, thirst, sex drive. I think there's like 7 things that the hypothalamus is kind of chiefly involved in, but thirst and appetite are the 2 things we're interested in this for this course. And so your blood volume gets low, and the hypothalamus is like, we're thirsty. Okay, sends that to your brain, and your brain, you know, you want to drink, right? So that's kind of a big part of it, is your hypothalamus just reading the signal around the blood volume. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to talk to the pituitary gland, which is kind of right beside the hypothalamus in your brain, and the pituitary gland is a gland. So when we say gland, it means something that secretes hormones. And again, I can't even remember how many hormones the pituitary gland secretes, a whole bunch of them. And one of them is the one that tells the kidneys to conserve water. Okay, and so you can see, oh, there it is. I knew. I couldn't remember the name. Antidiuretic hormone, right? So diuretic means something that makes you urinate more. So antidiuretic means you're trying to do the opposite, urinate less. So it's basically telling your kidneys to conserve water, concentrate the urine, and when you pee, it's probably going to be more yellow. So don't panic if your pee is yellow. That's okay, it's normal. It just means your kidneys are doing their thing. They're conserving water when you need to, and when you have excess water, it's going to have less color to it. It's not usually a big deal unless it's unusually dark or weird colors, but usually by then you know you're thirsty, hopefully anyway. And that's kind of what's going on there. And so the bottom line is listen to our bodies, right? Try to drink when we're thirsty, and you know, maybe not worry about it so much when we're not, despite all the marketing. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to sports drinks, because the marketing around sports drinks is just absolutely ridiculous about telling you how much you need to drink and all these kind of things. They're not necessarily a bad thing, and I'll get to that in a minute. Let's just talk about electrolytes for a moment. There's this little graphic I found on the internet, but the 3 main electrolytes are the ones on the right: potassium, chloride, and sodium. Okay, those are the most important ones to make sure we have a good balance. And what are electrolytes? These are basically minerals that are in your blood, and you can see the word electric in there because they have a charge, right? And so technically, if these kind of things are in solution, you could send electricity through that solution, right? So I don't know why we use the word electrolyte when we're talking about nutrition, because if this was a chemistry class, I would just call these ions, right? So again, this is the kind of thing with different disciplines. We have different names for things. But the name is stuck, and people like to talk about these things all the time. So what do these things do? They do a few things, right? One is they regulate how much water is in your cells and in your blood. Okay, and if you don't have a nice balance, your body is going to dry up, or it's going to have too much blood volume, or something is not going to be right. Okay, part of the problem about these things is that you do lose them when you sweat. You probably know your sweat is kind of salty, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can lose some when you sweat. So a big part is maintaining that water balance. They're also involved in buffering, and when I say buffering, I mean maintaining your body's appropriate pHs. Right? So if you don't have enough of these, your body's going to have a harder time maintaining appropriate blood pH levels. And that's actually a pretty extreme thing to happen. Usually you're a little bit more worried about that water balance getting dehydrated. That's going to happen first before anything else. They have a whole bunch of other roles, these electrolytes, and we'll talk about some of these minerals. Like potassium is involved in nerve impulses and making sure your heart operates properly without potassium, your heart cannot pump. It's part of the mechanism there. And I'll come back to those in a few minutes when we talk about sports drinks in terms of whether you should drink them or not. So what's going to happen if you're dehydrated? Kind of depends on how bad it is, right? Kind of in that, the first level, you're going to be thirsty. Hopefully that's pretty obvious. And all the things around that, maybe your mouth feels dry, maybe you're breathing a little different, those kind of things. And that's just your body kind of just saying, look, dude, get some water right away. Come on, you're thirsty. You can do it, right? A few other things, right? Your brain might be sluggish and whatnot. You can see I've got this big long list here from the textbook kind of talking about that. But usually we're not talking about anything too serious when you're mildly hydrated, although you should probably get something done right away. A severe dehydration, you're starting to talk about getting disoriented, those kind of things. Sometimes you can actually affect your pulse and your heart. I'm not exactly sure how that works. Probably has something to do with those electrolytes and all that. And technically, since you're dehydrated, your blood's going to get a little thicker, and that's going to affect a lot of body systems. In the severe cases, you're looking at seizures and possibly death and things like that. You can see a bunch of other lists, things on the list, heart attack and whatnot. Like I said, your blood is getting thick. We're talking about affecting multiple organ systems and whatnot. So what is going to affect your needs for liquids? About 1,000 things, right? Is it hot? Is it cold? Are you exercising? Are you, what's going on with your body in terms of, all sorts of physiological conditions can affect your thirst, such as having diabetes. Are you pregnant? Are you lactating? Women who are lactating, they're feeding a baby liquids, right? So often lactating mothers do need a significant amount more of water or fluids in their diets in order to maintain the proper breastfeeding, right? Age, surgery, blood loss, you can see a whole bunch of other things on there. One thing to take note is coffee. There's been a lot of research on coffee. Some of you may know that coffee or caffeine, is a diuretic. So as I mentioned, a diuretic is something that makes you want to urinate more often. There's lots of diuretics out there. There's some that are in pill form for people who are trying to get rid of infections and things like that. Alcohol is a diuretic. Ginger is a diuretic. I think there's a few other spices that are diuretics. And you can see there's sort of a note there about, you drink a cup of coffee, are you going to lose more water than you're gaining for drinking a cup? And the answer is probably not. You're probably going to gain some liquid from that coffee, unless you're drinking excessive amounts, and there's excessive amounts of caffeine. That's where the research is a little bit more clear. But for most normal uses, people having 1 or 2 cups at a time, the answer is you're probably gaining a little water. You probably will have to make a trip or two to the washroom. I know particularly, I remember, every time I'm invigilating an exam around here, there's always somebody who has to go to the washroom, and they're like, yeah, I just had 3 cups of coffee. Maybe I should have done that, right? Again, you're consuming lots of liquid too. I feel like there's something else I was going to say about this, but I can't remember what it was. But yeah, like I said, tons and tons of different reasons why you might need water. So this comes down to this kind of thing. And you can see my little note in the corner about in terms of, the agreement around these recommendations. This is really just based on that water balance thing, right? If you look at how much water you are getting rid of in a day, then obviously we have to replace it, okay? And so you can see it's sort of saying here, okay, let's take a look here. Women 19 plus, I imagine most of us are kind of in that category, or well, at least the women here, men 19 plus, so 9 to 12 cups of water, right? That's a lot of liquid, right? Most of us are probably not consuming that amount in a day, but you are eating foods, right? So I made my lunch today, right? I had some cucumbers in there. How much water is in that cucumber? I had a yogurt in there. How much water is in that yogurt? So, I mean, for the most part, this is something that, like I said, there's a lot of marketing around telling people, make sure you get all that water, make sure you get it all, make sure you're drinking enough. And it's even going beyond that in the marketing to say it's going to affect your skin quality and all those kind of things. And the reality is, there's a lot of kind of unclear research on those kind of things, right? I know I was listening to a podcast about a dermatologist that was insisting that most people don't get enough water and it's going to affect your skin quality. And then I spent a little bit of time trying to look into that, and I couldn't really find any clear data on that kind of thing. So she was a dermatologist. She probably knows what she's talking about, or maybe she's bought into the myths, right? Nobody's infallible, and lots of people get caught up in these things. So I see these kind of things, like I said, all the time, and I know from experience that you can't just go crazy on these things, right? Don't drink too much. You're just going to be doing those extra trips to the washroom. Listen to your thirst. Of course, if you're somebody who has a condition where your thirst isn't working properly, then you do need to monitor this a little more carefully. I was going to play this video for you, but it's a little long, and they interview a urologist, and he talks a lot about the kidney functions and those kind of things. You can look at it on your own time, but it's kind of just saying what I've already said, is listen to your thirst. Okay? Of course I can't. Oh, there we go. Like I said, we're getting a lot of water from our food, and we're not all necessarily drinking water. I already had this morning, I had a glass of water and I had a cup of tea. So I'm already on my way to getting a lot of liquid. For breakfast, I had some toast, probably not a lot of water content in there, but you can see there's a list of various foods and different types of water content in them. And like I said, you are getting a lot of water from those things. And there's a graphic, right? Probably no surprise, fruits and vegetables, pretty high water content, and other things maybe not quite as much. Okay, let's talk about hard and soft water. This is one of these things that I talk about in my other classes quite a bit. And so interestingly, I'm trying to remember what year this was. I remember I was in my backyard and some guy shows up with a clipboard and a letter, and it said something about the regional municipality on it, asking to see my water bill or something like that. And so I went and got it and sort of got it. I'm like, who's this guy? Right? So show my water bill, and by then I realized he's trying to sell me something and telling me, yeah, the water in this town is very hard. It's going to make your hair fall out, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, scam, right? And I told him to get out of here. And by the time I got there, I was going to take a photo of his license plate, but I didn't get there in time. But I did give a description, this truck, to the RCMP, and called them, and they said, yeah, there's somebody going around scamming people, saying they're selling something, but they're just taking the money and running. But hard water is not bad. It is not going to make your hair fall out. Okay, so let's just start there. What is hard water? Hard water has something called divalent cations in it. That can mean a whole bunch of things, but generally in most cases it means calcium and or magnesium. Most water that I've tested has calcium in it and magnesium, sometimes to a smaller degree. And those things are actually not too bad. Those are minerals that are important and essential for your diet. You have calcium in your bones. So what is the problem with hard water? I'll talk about that in a moment. One of the big things is that it scales. Right? So those minerals can deposit on things. So maybe you've had scaling on your faucet or your shower, and you can actually clean that away with just vinegar and water very easily. And if your water is harder, the more that's going to happen. Leaves a ring around the tub, sometimes stains on the toilet, and it's darn annoying. And your pipes are probably going to slowly over the years get clogged because of the deposits in your pipes. And sometimes that's why pipes burst in old homes. It's kind of just, for the most part, unfortunately, a matter of time. And it's one of those things we have to live with. And here's the other thing. We live in Canada. Most water in Canada is hard, or at least classified as very hard. And it's not a bad thing for your health. It's just annoying. The other problem with hard water is it doesn't allow your soap to lather very well. So it means, if you're washing your hair, you may need to use more shampoo. Okay. and a few things like that. I think I had actually got a chart here. In terms of drinking, most people think hard water actually tastes better than soft water. So that's not a bad thing. Soft water tends to have more sodium in it than hard water. And sodium is something that actually many people are trying to avoid because of high blood pressure. And enough sodium can actually make it taste salty as well. And so that's something as well, right? Soft water also tends to have the ability to dissolve certain contaminants a bit more. And so things that can be poisonous. So you can see up there, I've got cadmium and lead. So there's some disadvantages to soft water. On the other hand, if you have soft water, try doing this at home sometime if you like. Make a cup of tea using water from bottled water versus your tap water, and you'll see that the soft water, it looks nicer, right? The tea with the heart of the water, it's almost a little more cloudy and looks less appetizing. And if somebody ever tries to sell you a soft water system, that's what they're going to do. They're probably going to make a cup of tea for you and show you the differences because, of course, the soft water one looks so much more beautiful. Not to say that soft water systems are a bad thing. I know some people have what's it called? Yes, the water softeners, but they have the hot water on demand things, right? And in many cases there, you need to have a water softener because we're concerned about the clogging of the system, right? Although my friend has one and he said he didn't install a water softening system. So we'll see if that happens. The other thing is if your water is really, really hard, basically what the water softening system is doing is replacing the calcium with sodium. So if your water is really, really hard, you're going to get basically salty tasting water. Not a bad thing. Again, it's a matter of preference. Sometimes it depends on your system, in terms of whether you have a system that needs the soft water or not, those kind of things. Skin and hair. Water that is hard enough can sometimes leave residues on your skin and hair. That can sometimes make certain people feel itchy and those kind of things. And so, there's advantages and disadvantages. But really, when it comes down to hard water versus soft water, hard water was probably going to leave a residue and a ring around your tub, and your soap may not lather as well. Soft water is probably not going to do that. Your shampoo will work better, but we're not looking at major health issues. I think I've got, the last thing here. And soft water will clean your clothing and everything else more efficiently as well. But like I said, it's not a bad thing, okay? I'm trying to just get rid of that myth. So many people are scared of hard water. It's not a big deal, really. Oh yeah, I found this. This was something else too. I just cleaned my kettle the other day. I was looking in the bottom of it and it had quite the buildup in the bottom. And that's something that people look at and get kind of grossed out by. But this is something you can clean just by soaking that in a little bit of vinegar. I think what I did is I just poured the vinegar in and forgot about it. An hour later, I gave it a good rinse and it was all good to go. So let's talk a little bit about drinking water as well. Again, something where there's a lot of kind of myths around, what's going on in terms of whether we should be drinking water from the tap, gas, or not. And people have very strong opinions around water. And I'll talk about that for a few minutes now. If you think about water that most people drink, just drinking pure water, it's usually these three categories, right? Tap water, sometimes tap water put through a filter or a fridge Brita filter or some other system. Or sometimes people obviously drink bottled water or water that they've got from the grocery store in those giant jugs, right? Which is usually put through some sort of filtration system or something like that. All of these are usually from some sort of domestic source. So what do I mean by that? I mean it's coming from a river or a lake or something like that originally, sometimes groundwater. And I'll talk about some of the differences between those things in a moment. Bottled water is big deal, right? We're talking about gasoline prices. We're probably paying more per liter for bottled water than we are than the gasoline prices. By the way, here's an interesting thing. I put on my family group chat asking what everyone's gas prices is. We're actually doing all right out here. I know someone in Ontario, it hit more than $2 a liter. I was kind of like, wow, that's quite something, isn't it? Yeah, I know. I'm happy that I have a small car right now. Yeah. As soon as the weather warms up, I'm walking. So So let's talk a little bit about tap water versus bottled water in terms of what is going on around the regulations. In Canada, we have something called the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines. And they're actually some of the most stringent guidelines in the world in terms of, and you can go on the internet, you can find these things, and it tells you exactly how much of what should be in the water. And so at the water treatment plant here, they test the water, they check for those things. And so it's a whole list of a bunch of things, from toxic things such as arsenic and lead to just typical things like sodium and iron and whatnot. And we have very, very stringent guidelines. But notice that word, guideline. So it turns out that the water treatment plant is not legally bound to these guidelines. These guidelines are from the federal government, and they're not legally bound to that, but they are legally bound to the province. So it turns out that the municipality, when they make our drinking water, they have an agreement with the province, and usually it's based around those guidelines. But sometimes there's a little bit of wiggle room, right? Depending on what's in our river and whatnot, they may exceed those guidelines and whatnot, but they are very, very stringent. So generally, tap water the guidelines are much more stringent than what you would see for bottled water. Bottled water is regulated under the Food and Drugs Act because it's a consumable product, and their regulations are actually much less strict. But it is an act, and they're more legally bound. So it's kind of one of those funny things in terms of what is going on. And there's all sorts of videos on YouTube and whatnot of water experts testing them, and for the most part, not seeing much of a difference. Kind of depends on the brand. A lot of these here are just tap water anyway. They usually take the tap water and they put it through a few extra filters. Sometimes they're filtering out chlorine or organics or something like that. But in a lot of cases, and I have tested it, I'm not seeing much of a difference. Sometimes I'm seeing a little bit of extra copper in the tap water. Why would we have copper in the tap water? Copper pipes, yeah. And sometimes fluoride, right? We don't add fluoride here. I'll get to that in a second. But we do have fluoride in the geology here, right? So it's picking up naturally in the river, right? And often you don't see that in the bottled water. Question? It depends on what people are hooking up. Sometimes it's a water softening, and that's it. And that's another thing often that's done with bottled water is they remove some of the minerals using that. But there's all sorts of different systems. The one that I can't remember where it was, but again, some guy was trying to sell me something, and it had 3 or 4 cartridges in it, and each cartridge did something different. One was a charcoal cartridge, which would take away organics. Another was, I think, a water softening cartridge, and another was I'm trying to remember what the third one is, some sort of deionizing cartridge that was supposed to take away some of the excess salts and minerals, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Again, it depends on what they're looking at. But oh, interesting. Yeah, you know what? I mean, it's water, right? It's not a big deal. But yeah, some people like the taste more of tap water. Some like the taste of bottled water more. I mean, how many of us here have lived in multiple locations in our lives, right? So I grew up on well water. I love well water. It's so rich and earthy, and it's just amazing, right? City water just tastes like chlorine all the time, and I've gotten used to it over the years. But it's just not the same as what's back at home. You know what I mean? Other people are right. You know, you grow up on city water, and you just some people just that chlorine taste is just a turnoff, right? And so it's a matter of preference. But for health reasons, don't get caught up in it all. For the most part, it's not a big deal. There are some exceptions, of course. Was that about 3 years ago? And anyone hear about Flint, Michigan? Yeah, there's some big deal going on there around. Like, I don't know exactly what they changed. They changed something with their system, and it ended up introducing a whole bunch of lead into the water, right? And so you're looking at a relatively large city and a lot of lead. That's a big deal, right? I have no idea what's going on there now, but I know it was it was a big deal because, of course, that's very, very bad. So things like that do happen once in a while. And that's why they test them regularly. That's another thing about differences between tap water and bottled water. Tap water, depending on the variable, it is tested multiple times a day to kind of, once a day to once a week to once a month, depending on what they're looking at. But it is tested often much more frequently than you're going to test bottled water. I'm just going to see if there's a question there on the comments. Oh yes, that is something I did wanted to take up, talk about a little bit. So Katrina is saying that there's some ethical considerations with Nestle water and its extraction from Six Nation reservations. The people that live there don't have enough clean water. The water Nestle uses comes from their land. The aquifers are drained so much people live there now need to truck in their need. So yeah, I mean that's one of the things about bottled water, right? Is often the way these things work, and I think they're getting stricter with it now, but it used to be with bottled water, you get a license to take water from a certain stream or something like that, and they could honestly take as much as they wanted, at least historically. I think it's clamped down now a bit more on that. I'm not entirely familiar with those regulations. But you can imagine they go into a water source, and like Katrina was saying, they're taking so much that the people there don't have enough for their actual needs. Another thing about tap water, a lot of people don't know in Canada, most cities and towns kind of on the main drag are pretty good, but there are actually a lot of Aboriginal communities in Canada's northern Quebec or whatnot, that do not actually have access to clean drinking water. They don't have water treatment plants and those kind of things. And this is something that the federal government is trying to, they're keeping on a little bit of a hush-hush, but it is hitting the media once in a while. They're trying to work on it. I don't know what all the issues are, but it was a big deal. I know this past winter, there was an issue with the water in Iqaluit. That's the capital of Nunavut. And that's about, I think, about 9,000 people, right? So that's a big deal. Bottled water tested a lot less frequently, and the testing does not need to be done by a certified independent lab, right? So the water testing done here locally, they do some in their own lab, and samples have to be sent to an independent lab to verify that they're not fudging the numbers. And that's not the case with bottled water plants. So something to think about anyway. Not that I'm knocking bottled water. It has its uses, but I think it's overused. A couple other things I want to say about bottled water. This is the thing that drives me nuts. How much of those bottles end up in landfills? Okay. Anyway, I could rant about plastic forever, but I'm not going to do that. A couple other things I want to say about bottled water is there's so many different types, right? You've got like Fiji water and Iceland water and this and that, and there's a whole bunch of different names for these kind of things. So a couple of definitions for you, right? Spring water versus mineral water, right? So spring water means water that naturally actually comes to the surface, right? So that's what a spring is, water that's trickling somewhere. It could be from a brook or something like that as well. But that's kind of usually what they mean for spring water. Mineral water basically is spring water, but it has more dissolved minerals. So in terms of what does that mean? It means about 500 parts per million. And what's significant with that number is that's about the what your tongue is going to start to register is something a little different, right? So often salty is the word that people might have in mind when they taste that with mineral water. That's probably what was in my parents' water, right? Just enough minerals to give it a nice, rich, earthy taste, right? I have never tested their water, and well, their house is all bulldozed now, so I'll never get the chance to do that anymore. But that's usually the case. So salty is often what people think of it, and so if you ever do get into mineral water, you'll probably notice that, and I'll talk about some mineral waters in a moment. Some of these waters, depending where they're from, may or may not be treated, and that's not a bad thing, by the way. Most people that have wells do not have any water purification system, right? The water is going through the earth, right? So often there's sand there, it's getting naturally filtered. They might have a filter, and that might be the only thing they have, but they're not chlorinated or anything like that, and it's not a big deal. It might taste funny. Some parts of the season it may have weird colors, and usually they're not going to affect the health at all. Composition, right? What happened here? Yeah, so they're not really usually allowed to do too much to these things that they're marketing as spring water, but they are allowed to carbonate it, so give it bubbles. They are allowed to add fluoride, and you can see ozone is sometimes added. Ozone is used for disinfecting, right? So it's not there when you finally get the water. It actually degrades very, very quickly, but it's there just to kill pathogens. So like I said, those are some words that are used. I wanted to show you this here. There's this guy, I think he's a chemist, and he has all these infographics. They're kind of cool, and this is one of the ones that I thought was kind of interesting. He was looking at the different brands of bottled water, right? And you can see, Dasani here is in the middle, and as you're getting towards those inner circle, that green circle, it's usually considered it's tasting better and all that. And you can see he's looking at both pH and total dissolved solids. So I told you 500 is about where it's starting to taste salty. And you can see that there's a few out here. Perrier is about 600, I think. I don't know if anyone drinks Perrier. My brother is really into it, and I've had it once in a while, and it is. It's not salty, but there's just something about it that's just a little nice. It's really nice water. It really is. And probably because it has a little bit more dissolved minerals in there and whatnot. Again, a lot of this is a matter of preference, right? And apparently these are the better ones. So these big brands, Dasani, I can't remember if that's Coca-Cola or Pepsi that owns it. But basically, like I said, they're taking tap water and they're trying to get it fine-tuned to a certain taste, and they're doing that by looking at the amount of minerals and the pH in there to make sure it's going to taste consistent, right? Just some other definitions there. You may have heard of distilled water. Distilled water is water that's either been one of two things has happened to it. It's in most cases it's been boiled, and the vapor is condensed, and so you're boiling the water away from any of the dissolved substances. Sometimes near distilled water is made through a process called reverse osmosis, and basically it's something with minimal minerals. You're never going to get pure water. That just doesn't seem to happen. There's always a little something in there. But it's just going to have less minerals. You can drink it. It's not necessarily recommended because you're just drinking water, and it's good to get some electrolytes and whatnot in the system. Well water, as I mentioned, often it's just coming from the ground. And so that's about, I'm trying to remember what the number is. I think it's about 7% of Albertans are drinking well water from their home. And this is mostly rural people. We've got a lot of farms in Alberta, right? So, when you're out on the farm, you're not getting city water. Okay, I think a couple things to talk about water. Oh, question? Oh yeah, there's just about everything. Yeah, and that's something that the pH has been adjusted to be higher than 7, technically. I think I actually have a slide about it here, so we'll get to that in a second. So what about this stuff? Like, what is going on? Everybody's suddenly drinking it, right? This stuff has been around for a while. Sparkling water goes by a whole bunch of different names. Fizzy water, club soda, sparkling water. I can't think of all the names, but a whole bunch of names. So what is this stuff, right? Carbonated water. It has dissolved carbon dioxide gas. So that's what it is, right? And there's a whole bunch of these. Like I said, they seem to be taken over, and everywhere I go, somebody seems to be drinking these. So what is the big deal? Well, here's the benefits. Most of these have 0 calories, right? So you are drinking, you're getting fluids. And you can see right here on the nutrition label, it has nothing, no sugars, no protein, no fat, no carbohydrates, not a significant source of calcium or iron or anything like that. So this is basically water. Some cases, in the case of this one here, there's some flavoring added, and then the carbon dioxide, right? Gas. And so benefit, 0 calories. Some people that taste, right? It's just, the fizziness on your tongue, you know, and a hot day, right? You know, it's just nice. And just as hydrating as regular water, right? Because that's all you're drinking. So I find when I drink this stuff, I do have to go to the washroom quite soon afterwards, probably because it's very easy to just down one of those within seconds, right? You know, it's just like it's a hot day, it's so good, and you go through it, and you're just like, wow, I've done this already, right? But basically, you're just drinking water. So what are the, oh, and you might get a full feeling. Some people talk about that. My nephew has gained quite a bit of weight over the last few years, I'll just say that. And he was telling me he was regularly coming home from work and having a beer, and he feels that was one of his bad habits. And so he got into the, what's the one you can make at home? Soda Stream? Right, so he's telling me he was trying that, and he said actually the carbonated water makes him feel kind of full. And so that was one of his things to try to cut down. I don't know how that's working out for him. I haven't actually seen him in about 3 years. So, but there are some you know, disadvantages. They're not huge. Hold on a second. Put that cursor in the corner. What about some disadvantages? Doesn't contain fluoride. We'll talk about fluoride in a minute. I actually got fluoride stuck with the minerals. I should have stuck it with the water. So fluoride is good for your teeth. So if you're drinking bottled water, you're probably not getting fluoride that might be in your municipal system that's added there. So just a quick note, I mentioned we don't add fluoride to our water here. My dentist is very upset about that. He's been here for a long time, and he was telling me he has seen a higher frequency of cavities since they stopped doing it. But I've also talked to the water treatment people and asked them about it. And there's two big factors around fluoride. One is there's a cost to adding it, right? It's not much, but you know, let's say it's $5 a head per person. Multiply that by 100,000 people or more. You know, you're looking at $500,000 or whatever, right? They're probably saving $1 million a year. And the other thing is we have water natural, or we have fluoride naturally in our water in Fort McMurray, and they don't want to exceed the guidelines, right? If you add fluoride and you end up with, you know, a week where there's extra in the water, they could be accidentally exceeding the guidelines, and so that's one of the other things. And of course, there's different arguments around it in terms of, well, everyone has access to toothpaste, don't they? Who's even drinking tap water nowadays anyway? You know, I mean, anyway, you could go on a rabbit hole on this. We'll come back to fluoride in a bit here. Other drawbacks. It's a little bit more acidic than regular water. So this is something that I've noticed on the internet that is bashing these kind of things. But the reality is almost every other liquid you drink, juice, cola, almost every other beverage is more acidic than this stuff. So it's bad for your teeth is what they're saying, but probably not as bad as all the other drinks you could possibly get other than tap water. So, you know, it's the kind of thing where, you know, you drink a little bit of this. What should you do? Well, in most cases, nothing. Your saliva is going to rinse your mouth, probably neutralize the acid a little bit. If you're concerned, you know, rinse your mouth out afterwards with regular water, or brush your teeth, you know, a little bit later or something like that. I can't remember if I was talking about this before with the teeth. We were talking about teeth at some point, weren't we? The recommendation, by the way, around brushing is that you kind of brush your teeth maybe about half an hour after you've eaten or consumed food. And the reason for that is that acid will actually soften your enamel. So the waiting the half an hour thing is to allow your saliva to maybe rinse away some of the acid and allow the enamel to kind of reharden a little bit before you stick something in there and physically scrub it away. So anyway, not always possible, but whenever you have something acidic, that's a very good recommendation. Rinse your mouth a little bit, wait half an hour before you brush your teeth. The other thing that some people complain about is the bloating, right? You are consuming gas, it's got to come out, right? It's going to go one way or another for the most part. Some people, that's a big deal. Some people, it's not causing too many problems, but that's about it. So really not too bad. So if you're looking for, you know, a drink, 0 calories, you know, you probably could do a lot worse. What about the alkaline water? I've never tried this stuff. Some people are swearing by it, and I spent some time digging into this and very little research on it. that I could find. Tons of claims, right? You're going to prevent cancer. You're going to age slower. You're going to have better skin. I'm trying to remember what the other claim was around, probably around something with energy or digesting food better or something like that. The reality is with this kind of thing, we think that probably all that's happening is getting to your digestive system and getting neutralized by the acid in your stomach. Right? Our stomach is concentrated hydrochloric acid. So it's probably not doing too much. Maybe temporarily, it might be doing something, adjusting your stomach acid pH for 5 minutes, but probably not doing very much. We'll see. Maybe somebody will come up with a massive research study eventually to change the claims. But like I said, lots of strong claims. As far as I can tell, it didn't do anything for us. So if you like the taste, go nuts. Okay, what about sports drinks? So these have been around for a long time. And Gatorade is actually named after, I can't remember the team, which was a college team, the something Gators. That's the one, yes. And they were known, they were a football team, and they're known for being that second half. They just were still strong, right? And their whole secret was they formulated something that eventually became Gatorade, right? But what is going on there? So these things here kind of have three things going for them. One is the liquid, right? The water. You're playing a football game or doing something else, you need water. Number two, they have electrolytes. And number three, often they have sugar in them for energy. All of those things are actually not too bad when you're doing some vigorous exercise. Not a bad thing at all. You can see there's the nutrition label from Gatorade. It does have calories, right? 140 calories. So if you're just drinking this because you like the taste, it has calories. It's got sugar in it, right? Just like any sugar beverage you're going to drink, you're getting calories and it's sugar. So just keep that in mind. Some people will down these things like crazy, and they're working out and they're just doing strength training, and then they're consuming a couple of these, and so there goes 300 calories, right? So that's something to think about. But you can see lots of sodium and potassium in there. Potassium is a good one for electrolyte balance and those kind of things. And then, of course, the fluids, right? So that's all good. So what does the research say? The research says if you are doing exercise, you're probably not going to run out of electrolytes in an hour to 90 minutes for most of us. If you're doing some extremely hot days, you might maybe 60 minutes, right? Kind of thing. So generally, for example, again, I coach soccer, right? And most of the kids are just drinking water. If it's a hot day, I do recommend people have some Gatorade at halftime. Halftime is 45 minutes in a regular soccer game, if they want to. But most of the time, it's just getting that water. So if you're looking at more extreme sports, people doing ultra marathons and things like that, this is where the electrolytes are going to start to get important, because you're going to drink water, you're going to dilute your blood, and eventually you're going to run out of them and have some problems. But for most of us, if you like the taste, great. If you have some other reason to get some electrolytes, that's not a problem, but that's kind of what the research is showing. There's a very good article called "The Truth About Sports Drinks." It's a good read. You should look it up. And it talks a lot about this, and it talks a lot actually about the marketing for these things. Again, this is the marketing where you've got these sports drinks companies telling you that you've got to worry about getting enough water and enough electrolytes, and really selling this as a package. And well, they are selling a product, and they're doing a very good job at it. There's other alternative sports drinks, like there's the gel packs as well, which kind of do the same thing. They have the sugar in them and the electrolytes. There's just less fluid. That's the same idea. There's some now. I saw one with caffeine as well, right? So not a bad thing. A lot of athletes do that. A lot of pro athletes will, I'll get you in a second. A lot of pro athletes, that's the formula, right? Before a game, 2 large cups of coffee and a couple of Advil, right? So a lot of professional athletes do that. A little extra caffeine in there can help you be a little extra alert, give you a little extra energy, and the Advil probably can. Some people have issues with their joints. Question?
I'm just going to say there's actually newer versions of Gatorade that are basically saying that the healthier alternatives to Gatorade.
Oh, of course.
And basically they're cutting down on the sugar, but they're following the same path that Gatorade, but they're adding.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's not like tobacco evil, but it's marketing, right? And it's working well. If you go to the grocery store, I mean, look at that massive section there, right? You've got, I mean, these are the two big ones, Gatorade and Powerade. But you go to a place like Sport Check, and they've got all these, you know, elite brands of sports drinks and whatnot. And there's a whole bunch out there. There's this one soccer coach I know. He's from England, and he'll actually import, I don't know what it is, some English sports drink that he believes in, and all that. It's kind of funny, but I think for him, it's more about the psychology, right? To, you know, hey kids, I got something special for you. This is gonna, you know, really do the job, right? So I think he's all into that too, right? There are, by the way, low or sugar versions, right? So Gatorade has three kind of streams. They have the regular Gatorade, they have G2. G2 is a reduced sugar version, and they have Gatorade Zero, which is the zero sugar version. So if you're concerned about the calories, you know, there are options, that kind of thing, right? I know some people really like this stuff, the flavor, and I can tell you on a hot day, you know, a little bit of blue Gatorade. I don't know why the blue stuff. I really like the blue stuff. There's just something about it quenching the thirst, right? And so there are lower calorie versions of it, which are trying to, you know, get rid of that whole thing of if you're just drinking sports drinks, you're just going to get fat in it, right? Question, comment?
So I coach skiing this one, and my issue with like Gatorade is, I think the kids have this idea that if they drink like half a Gatorade like all day, they don't need to drink any water or do anything else.
Right,
and
right.
I've issues with that, of like kids getting off the ski hill and being extremely dehydrated. And they're like, well, I had half a Gatorade. I'm like,
You're only getting half a cup of
you're
water.
only getting half.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's one of the big issues with Gatorade
There's-
is the marketing, and then the kids, like,
Yeah.
they believe it. And I'm like, guys, I've been doing this a long time. Like, you're not the first kid that's told me this.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, the marketing on these things, like I said, you know, it's just through the roof, but it's working,
Yeah.
right? They're selling a lot of product, and that's so it's encouraging them to market it more and come out with new flavors. Because, well, that's the other thing about marketing, right? If you have 5 flavors, you get more space on the shelf, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you have 5 flavors and then you have 3 different lines, now you've got 15 different products as well. Question?
I don't think it's something marketing. I've had parents that I always want to give them a water swimming, like body, like moving wise, and sometimes my parents would get mad if I would tell them to get a water break.
Yeah, actually,
They need
swimming
water.
swimming is a great example of a sport where you don't even realize you're sweating,
Yeah.
right? And
All your
especially,
muscles are moving.
yeah, for sure. And you're swimming, you know, several thousand meters a day in some cases, right? That's a lot of sweating, right? For sure. Yeah. I used to swim laps as well. I used to, and I just remember sometimes you're just like, wow, I'm really thirsty, right? And
Parents
you
are
know,
weird sometimes. Like, also just like get to the hill for like 5 hours on for a water break. And your parents be like, what are you doing? Why are you inside? I'm like,
yeah, or you have the exact opposite effect that happens,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I've coached all the groups of soccer, you know, and with the little kids, right, you want to be relatively energetic. And I just want to go the whole time. And then finally a parent will say, you need a water break. I'm on the opposite end, right? Because I'm just having so much fun in there, right? But question, comment?
I'm just a competitive someone. One of the main things is like I had a lot of teams that never drank water like ever, and they would always cramp up in the pool. So that was like the main thing that they would always
Yeah.
have like cramps.
Well, that's another thing too. Sometimes that can be affected by electrolyte balance is cramping up, right? And so, you know, again, kind of depends what you're eating, what you're drinking, those kind of things. Yeah. Anyway, the truth about sports drinks. There's 2 articles named that. One is a research article. The other is in I'm trying to remember, Wired magazine or something like that. It's a good read. Okay, time for a Kahoot. Start. Okay, there we go. I think I've got 6 questions. Go back to one other thing I was going to comment on. If you look at the Canadian drinking water guidelines with calcium, for example, some of the guidelines, there is no maximum. So you can have very, 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 very hard water, and that still is meeting the Canadian drinking guidelines. Calcium, and there is a maximum on iron. I can't remember magnesium, but calcium is one of those things that's not a big deal. In fact, it might be good for you. We absorb less calcium from direct water than we do from food, but it is something that's not a bad thing. Okay, let's get started here. Okay, so question 1. Which of the following is not a good source of vitamin C? Okay, so chicken is the right answer. Vitamin C is almost exclusively from fresh fruit and some vegetables. Animal products, not usually a source of vitamin C, very, very small amounts. Okay, question 2. What does folic acid do? All right, yeah, so that is correct, this one here. So folic acid, just a reminder, that's one of the supplements that's recommended for as a prenatal vitamin. And that's what it's doing is it's part of that neural tube development, which has to do with your spine and your brain and those kind of things. So it was introduced, I don't know when it was introduced as a concept, decades ago as a prevention for spina bifida and certain forms of mental retardation. So that's what why it's important. Someone trying to get in? You need to barricade the door. Okay, good job, Katie. Number 3, in addition to the brain, which organ regulates water excretion?
Thyroid.
Kidneys, good job. That's the 3 of you.
I didn't actually choose it.
All right, next question. Which mineral is found in high concentrations in hard water? All right, correct answer is calcium. Magnesium would be number 2. Those are usually the ones that make hard water. There are other divalent cations that can contribute to hard water, such as iron, but they're usually in such small amounts that they're never considered as being significant. Okay, one more question. What happened? Okay, I think this is the last one. How much water can be lost per hour by intense physical activity? Yep. So answers 2 liters, up to 2 liters, 1 to 2 liters is on a hot day, intense physical activity. Okay. Stasia, bronze. Nat, silver. Cassandra, wow, surprise in there with the gold. Well done. Okay. Okay, we got a few minutes to talk about some of the minerals. We're kind of done with water for now. Probably talk about it here and there a little bit. Like I said, I want to come back to fluoride as a mineral at some point. It's not going to happen today. But that is a part of the composition of the body. And in fact, if you look at this, this chart here, there's actually 2 minerals, calcium and phosphorus, that there's more than a pound of it in your body. So that's because it's in your bones. And all of the other ones are relatively small, and you can see kind of there's a cutoff where they talk about the major minerals. I don't know exactly what the cutoff is, but it looks like more than 30 grams. And then everything else is sort of in that milligram category, meaning there's tiny, tiny amounts. And so the minerals do all sorts of things, and some of them we're just gonna talk about tiny, tiny bit. Some of them we'll talk about quite a bit more. The big ones we're gonna talk a lot about are calcium and iron, and then most of the other ones somewhere in between. Sodium is important for blood pressure, so we'll talk about that one as well in the most amount of detail. So here's a bunch of them. Nice colors, trying to color code things. I like colors. Let's talk about calcium. Very abundant in your body. And like I said, a big part of that is in your bones. In fact, like 99% of the calcium in your body. It's actually essential for tons of other things that are worth mentioning. I think I got a little slide here somewhere that shows all the calcium functions, but the bones are the big one. So let's talk about bones for a minute. So bones are, they're not dead, right? They're living tissues. And I like this diagram here because it's showing that you actually have blood going in, and there are cells in there. But most of your bone, by the way, is collagen and then these minerals. So collagen, we were talking about a while ago there. It's a kind of a stringy protein. It's in your skin, a lot of connective tissue, but it's also in your bones, and it's sort of forming the matrix that those minerals are going to crystallize around and then form that ultimate bone structure. The minerals have calcium and phosphorus in it, but calcium is more abundant than the phosphorus by quite a bit. I can't remember what the ratio is. The other thing about the bones is you can think of them as a repository for calcium. So that means if your body needs calcium for other things, you can start sucking it out of your bones, right? And so this is a big deal for women who are pregnant because, of course, you're forming another body and forming new bones, and that fetus can actually take a lot of calcium out of the pregnant woman, right? And so it's important that that person get enough calcium in their diet for that reason. And this is something that can happen to all of us around age 40. You know, our body starts sometimes taking away a little bit of calcium from the outer layer of that for other parts of your body. So, you know, when you hit about 40, it's important to start upping your calcium intake a little bit, and particularly postmenopausal women, and we'll talk about that as well. Teeth are even a higher amount of calcium, particularly the enamel. The enamel is the part that that's contacting with the food, and it's almost pure mineral in there. That's actually a dead part of the tooth. That's the part that your dentist is concerned about, that you're going to wear away and then have cavities, right? So you don't have enough calcium, you can end up with something called osteoporosis. Okay, so you may remember we were talking about vitamin D and we were talking about osteomalacia. So there's a difference between the two things, but they are kind of related as well because they have something to do with your bones. So osteomalacia is basically when you're vitamin D deficient and your bones can actually get soft due to improper mineralization around the bones. Osteoporosis is not soft bones, but brittle bones. and it has more to do with not a vitamin D, but a calcium deficiency. So they're both kind of interrelated, and I don't know whether you can have both at the same time. Probably, I'm not sure how that works, but they are kind of technically different different issues. So osteoporosis is the most common people to have it are postmenopausal women. So after menopause, the body makes less estrogen, and estrogen, I'm not exactly sure what it does, but it has something to do with depositing calcium along with the vitamin D and all that. I'm not entirely sure how the physiological process works. So a lot of women, when in their age of years, find out they have osteoporosis, often from breaking something, right? So they go for a walk, they fall down, and suddenly they've broken a bone. And then they do a bone density scan, and they're told they have osteoporosis. And so you can take calcium supplements, you can take estrogen supplements, and those kind of things are usually the typical kind of treatments for this kind of thing. You can, and like you can see there on the slide, it is talking about deficiency of vitamin D is kind of related in there as well. I thought I was going to say something else, but okay, yeah. You can see this is a picture showing a woman at age 50 and age 80, and she has osteoporosis. And what you have are bones that are brittle and more susceptible to gravity and compression. And so that's what's actually happening in her vertebrae. Notice her legs, right? Her leg bones are all the same size. This is all in the vertebrae. And you know, in worst case scenario, what you're looking at is pinched nerves and things like that, which can lead to, you know, really excruciating pain in some cases. But that's kind of what is going on there. So this is something that women have to worry about, but men as well, but just women is a little bit more common due to that, you know, the estrogen balance after menopause. In terms of risk factors, there's a whole bunch. Unfortunately, about 35% of the risk factors, there's not much you can do about it, right? Genetics and other things like bone density. Excuse me. White and Asian people are more likely to have it than people with darker skin. I'm not sure what that's all about. Probably has something to do with genetic heritage or something like that. Skinny, thin people who are skinny and thin as children, their bone density tends to not be as great. And again, that has environmental and genetic aspects to it. Excuse me, I feel like I'm going to cough. And the thing is, right, if you are a heavier person, your body deposits more minerals on the bones. And so if you have that happening when you're developing, when you're an adult, you're going to have stronger bones. So it's kind of, there's a correlation between that whole thing as well. What is modifiable? Environmental. So smoking, vitamin D intake, those are the two that come to mind. Estrogen deficiency, that is something that's modifiable, meaning you can get supplemented with estrogen if you are short on it. And a whole bunch of other things on there. What else is on the list? Calcium intake, I think that's an obvious one on there. But anyway, yeah, this is something that many of us may have to deal with. I know that my grandmother, shortly before she died, she was in the hospital, and she was ill and confused and got up out of her hospital bed and broke her leg. And the doctor had told my mom that, yeah, she has advanced osteoporosis. Her bones are like powder, are the words he used, right? And so that was unfortunate for her, and may have been part of the reason why she died. Calcium and vitamin D, these are important, and that people get lots of it. I guess we talked about that as well, estrogen deficiency. So I guess I've said all this. I'm not going to dwell on this anymore. What are we doing for time? Almost there, right? So what else, right? People who are physically active tend to have stronger bones. They put more stress on the bones. That's how you build strong bones, by the way, you know, it's like muscles. You work them out, right? This is a big deal for astronauts, by the way. They can lose bone mass because they're not experiencing, you know, if you're spending a lot of time in that space station, you're not experiencing gravity. And so your bones can actually get weaker. So they do all sorts of strength training and things like that to try to offset it, but you can't offset it completely without good old gravity. But of course, you know, people who are doing more physical activity doing it with stronger bones as well, as long as you don't break them too. There are certain things you can have in your diet as well that can contribute to osteoporosis. So I can't remember whether I mentioned or not, but people who eat too much protein, I'm not sure how that works, but apparently that is correlated with lower calcium on your bones and things like that. Apparently excess caffeine and soft drinks are known for it as well. And I don't really know a lot about those mechanisms. There we go. I knew there was a slide like this. Calcium is not just in your bones. It's doing a whole bunch of things. Every time you move a muscle, that is calcium getting released in that muscle cell that is telling that muscle to contract. So right now, you're moving muscles, you're breathing, you're talking, you're fidgeting, all those require calcium. So it's important for our neurons, important for heart functions, a whole bunch of other types of things that are going on in your body. This is talking about releasing hormones. A lot of these are related to things going on in neurons or the tissues that are receiving impulses from the neurons. So the muscles being the big one, but there are lots of muscles that are involved that use calcium as part of their physiological function. So DRIs for calcium, I'm assuming most of us are kind of in here, the 19 to 50 years of age, so 2,500 milligrams. But you can see for calcium, kind of depending on where you are in life, the recommended dose is a little higher, a little lower, that kind of thing. You can see, for example, lactating women in pregnancy is higher, and those kind of things, right? Where do we get calcium from? A good source of calcium is dairy products. And dairy products are in some ways the gold standard for calcium for two reasons. One is that they contain a lot of calcium, and two, we absorb calcium better from dairy products than most of the other foods out there. Right, I know like broccoli's on there, I think, has a little bit of calcium in there, the very first one, broccoli. We don't absorb calcium quite as efficiently from broccoli as we do from milk products for some reason. So this is something that vegans always have to, you know, make sure they're getting enough of it. There are calcium supplements, and but they do not beat the absorption that you do get from dairy products. So just a thing on that. Obviously, not everyone can get dairy products, so they have to start looking at other things. Another good source of calcium is certain animal products. I know there are certain fish. Do people eat sardines with the bones? I don't. I don't eat sardines. But there's certain fish that people eat with the bones and everything. Apparently, that is also another good source. What is this red one here? Is that the fish? Tofu, made with calcium salt. I guess I didn't realize that was a thing. Yeah, so you know there are calcium fortified foods and whatnot. Again, sometimes it's the absorption that can be the issue. We can get supplements. Be aware of the supplements. Some are higher quality than others. A few years ago, there was what were they called? Coral calcium. It comes from coral. So corals are mostly calcium carbonate. So I guess they were taking dead coral and crushing out and putting in supplements. And those ones, I do not recommend them. I don't know whether they've fixed this or not, but there was a big scandal a number of years ago with, they found there were like heavy metals or something in it, right? So we want to get away from that kind of thing. Okay, I guess I kind of said this. Milk alternatives, certain vegetables, vitamin D supplementation can help you absorb the calcium better if you're deficient, and that's something that they're often recommending for people that are over 50 or people that are maybe not getting enough meat or dairy products in the diet. Anyway, that's a good place to stop. We'll talk about phosphorus next day, which is more bones. Not much else to say about phosphorus at the moment, but we'll see you guys on Friday, and thanks for coming out.